Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to another panel session. Today, we're going to talk about how farm viability depends on so much more than what happens in the field. Now, while we often focus on production and farm management, many of the biggest challenges that farmers face are shaped by what happens after harvest, that is, processing, packaging, distribution, and access to markets. Now, as processing facilities and post production industries become increasingly consolidated, primary producers are left with fewer options for where and how to sell their products. Turns out, not long ago, much of this work happened on farms or through small scale enterprises in nearby towns. These local processing systems allowed farmers to capture more value, reach customers more directly, strengthen rural economies, and create meaningful employment close to home. In today's panel, we're going to speak with farmers and small scale processors who are keeping these local industries alive while finding new ways to make them viable in an era of mass production and industrial consolidation. Together, we're going to explore practical opportunities for adding value to raw farm products, the real challenges of setting up micro-processing operations, and the lessons learned from people who are already doing it. We're also going to look at how farmers can start their own processing enterprises or collaborate with others in their community to transform their products, diversify income, and rebuild more resilient local food economies. Now, since my panelists will introduce themselves in a moment, let's jump right in. And we're joined today by Jessica, Claire, and Manya, who are going to give us some direct experiences from their own operations in different parts of Europe. So to get us started, Manya, would you like to tell us about your operation, where you are, and how post-processing plays a key role in your business?
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Hello, everybody. Just to set the scene, my farm is called Torre Dolce. We're based in Tuscany, in Siena, in Italy, and we're a 50-hectare farm, and our main product is wine and oil, although we also have a business which includes hospitality, so tourism and very much agritourism. So we make sure that our guests are involved with the farming side of it. That's a very important part of our concept, of our vision, of our mission of communicating everything we do. And we've got a vegetable garden, which goes into our restaurant, as well as the oil and wine. And so that's another way we try and communicate through sensorial way what we do. And we use animals in the farming. So I have in particular a flock of sheep, which I use in the vineyards and in the olive groves. And we produce a lot of our own products. So a lot of the byproducts of the several parts of the business. So both the wine byproducts and olive oil byproducts like wood chips, but also the skins, they go into making compost teas, bokashis, and things which you can then introduce back into the farming. Coffee and eggshells from the restaurant come back down as well. So I guess that's quite an important part of being in control of the whole process, is having control over how some of the of owning the byproducts and transforming the byproducts as well and reintroducing them into the cycle.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that introduction. Let's go now to Claire. Can you tell us about your operation and how post-production plays a role in what you do?
So we're an 80-acre farm in Shropshire in the UK, sort of halfway between Wales and Birmingham, for those that don't know what it is, which is most people. It's pretty unknown, but it's a all grazing, so all permanent pasture farm. So we don't do any cropping. And so our focus is on livestock and perennial production. So we have a beef suckler herd and we do pastured meat chickens. We're organically certified farm, and our beef cattle are certified pasture for life as well. So 100% grain free at every stage of life. And then so quite a few early stage agroforestry planting. So a 1 hectare forest garden and a few other things, orchards and things. But we're not at the point so they're on my mind, like down the line, post-production, what we'll do. But at the moment, my kind of like near problems are with the beef and with the chicken. So that would be relating to abattoir and butchery. And our main problem is distance to those places, because all of the small ones, so with poultry is a particular issue, with such as the industrialization of the industry in the UK. There's abattoirs not very far away from us, but we don't have access to them because they are the kind of million bird a week abattoirs. And although we do have some beef ones on our doorstep, what we often struggle with is local killing and quality butchery, or butchery designed for retail, like retail ready. because a key part of our model is selling directly. That's like it only stacks up to farm and work in this way when we're selling directly. And so quality butchery and local abattoirs is a key part for us. Currently, because we're organically certified for our chicken, I have to travel 4 hours to our local abattoir. So that's a real like front of mind thing for me to be worrying about.
Yeah, and I think this is so relevant because it's not always feasible for people to have post-processing on their farm, but they are reliant usually on, especially for smaller operations, support micro industries within the rural community. And as those close down, you either have a non-feasible option or no option at all. And we'll go back to that again real soon. Thank you. And Jessica, your turn. I would love to hear more about how you have integrated the whole process of what it is that you grow and are working to turn into a valuable product despite the challenges you've been facing.
So I'm in Ibiza working with, well, it's probably 45 hectares at the moment, but I'm going to reduce it back to 30 because that's what I have rights to in the pack. And I'm working with local variety grains and ancient grains from the mainland, and we are taking on like abandoned fields. I mean, they've been out of use for 35 to 70 years for the most part, and then bringing them back into traditional rotations to support ecosystem health, because the native flora and fauna have evolved alongside traditional farming here. Like 73% of the land on the island is farmland, which has been, for the most part, abandoned. So the idea was to grow local grains and get them direct to mill and get them to direct to the bakers and the restaurants. And that was all going very well. You know, the infrastructure doesn't exist. So I take the grain to Formentera to clean and mill, which is the neighboring island. And obviously that puts a cost on per kilo, but they don't have capacity they don't have enough staff, so they're really pushed with what they're trying to achieve, and they don't always have availability, and then there's a lack of harvesters and on the island, and I don't have my own harvester. And so that all broke down this year or last year quite dramatically, where the harvester broke down on day one and waited for parts from off the island. Meanwhile, and that took 2.5 weeks. Then the mechanic's mother died, very sadly, which took another 5 days. And meanwhile, I watched pigeons decimate the fields. So that was pretty much that. What I managed to salvage didn't get milled because the mill in Formentera, their cleaning machinery was broken and they were waiting for a part from China. And that took a really long time, took about 4 months. And then they were installing new machinery. So all in all, that took 7 months. Meanwhile, my grain, which I normally store in blue bins, which is really labor intensive because you're touching the grain a lot. And I do that at home. I just store it like onto the trees on pallets, in blue bins. It's not very professional. So I stored it in a warehouse and it got devoured by weevils and mites, and I just dumped it all 2 weeks ago. So that's my story from last year. And my takeaway from that is, you know, really the necessity to invest in some infrastructure that I'm in control of. And even if that's, you know, like really small scale and secondhand, and also I'm pulling back from production, so I'm just going to be working on product development and wait till there should be a mill here in 2 to 3 years. So, and I think that, you know, I'm just going to get soil health really, really good and work on the market, you know, work on my products, my labels, seed multiplication, and just be ready for the mill, because it's not working, basically.
Too volatile. There's too many things that can go wrong that are
There's
no
too
longer in
many
your
things out of my control.
control.
I'm talking to a farmer on the mainland who might come over with his harvester and take over because my neighbour's retiring. So that could be a good, and he's a real machinist. So his is not going to break down, I hope. So yeah, I've taken a step back. I'm focusing on R&D and infrastructure, buying seed cleaning, you know, really small scale.
And yeah, that's where I'm at.
So, with all of these challenges and the conclusion that maybe now is not the time to take on so many diverse risks because of the fragility that's out of your hand, where do you see the opportunities? Because, like you said, you're still going to be developing the brand, probably fostering these partnerships. Where are the areas where you see opportunity, and where do you feel like you just need to wait until some other people offer support or your own infrastructure can get established?
Well, I think if I had the seed cleaning machinery, I could register for sales and support some of the other young farmers who are also, waiting for the mill and just work on. And so, there's a possible more secure revenue there. And also I could probably go around to the other farms, and because a lot of the farmers here are growing grain for livestock for supplementary feeding during summer months, and they don't, most of them don't have seed cleaning. So I think there's an opportunity, and that's for quite a small investment. And I'm yeah, I'm not counting on production at all. It's, there's a plague of pigeons. The year before was a total drought. It's very, if I produce, great. If I get to mill it, great. But that's not gonna, it's not on paper. It's just, I can't count on that. So yeah,
Understandable. I've
but
actually known a
just
couple of farmers who started by producing and selling directly all of their own things, sometimes in CSA models, sometimes in their own labels, who have started to pull back from that and buy from members of their community who offer the quality and the standards that their customers like in order to reduce some of the variables that make a business like this volatile. It's interesting to hear this from you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's opportunity in the next couple of years to talk, to develop some relationships with some of the other farmers who aren't interested in the post-production side of things, and if they're prepared to like work with me and the kind of the growing methodologies, then that also decreases risk. Yeah.
Thank you for those insights. So, Claire, moving back to you on this reliance on infrastructure that you're finding is quickly disappearing or is just too far away to make sense for your model of sales. Where are you seeing possibilities for maybe pivoting on how you work? Or, yeah, how are you how are you tackling these challenges?
Yeah, so it's not a new story. Like access to small abattoirs is not new, but it tends, certainly in the UK, the focus always tends to be on red meat. I just don't think people even realize, they don't even think about white meat ones. But so what are we doing for thinking about chicken? There's two options available to us, really. Well, three. One is, carry on as we are, driving a really long way. Secondly is look at on-farm processing, of which I've definitely considered, looked at in a lot of depth. There are good people in the UK doing it, and there's places I can go to learn. It's not an unfamiliar thing to me, but to make sure that we were doing it properly. But there's a couple of regulatory things that provide a bit of a blocker. So if you are processing birds yourself, it's really for selling directly to other people from the farm. And we do that, but it's only about 50% of our volume. We actually sell to a lot of not wholesalers as we know them maybe, but other like organic veg box schemes that want to have a meat offering as well. So they're an important part of our customer base. And as soon as I started to sell through them, we lose that directness. And the other thing is some of them are more than 30 miles away, and that's the other thing, that you have to sell it within 30 miles of where you are. And we have our main model, our main direct to customer, we have some that collect from the farm, but many we're shipping meat all over the country. So it's like there's a number of complications that come once we've got that, that we then can't really sell it very easily. My long-term plan would be that we'd sell all of our meat directly to the people eating it, from the farm. They're coming to collect it, or I'm taking it to a pickup point. But in this interim, as we've been going for a few years, but as we build that up, we're not there yet. So I rely on those other markets. So that kind of puts us out of doing on-farm slaughter, unless we were to build like, a proper plant. But where we're located as well, we're very rural, down single track roads. So any sort of infrastructure here is needing to be seriously considered, and we just wouldn't be a suitable location to have any kind of like infrastructure like that here. But where and I know lots of other sort of thinking about us, but also on behalf of others that want to do poultry, and we need more localized poultry. You know, some ways we look at our landscape here and it's like the last thing we need is more chickens, because we are so overrun with industrial scale chicken sheds and the problems that they bring. But what we really need is, you know, chickens in contact with soil and their landscape, not in too high a volume, but where they're playing a role as an ecosystem engineer. So and creating really nutrient dense food. So I'm really a fan of a hub, you know, model like we used to have, like was in the description for this session, going back to having local services. And just by, I've been pondering on it for ages, and for this year I decided to actually wind our production back a little bit, because it was like I need to give myself the space to think about how we're going to do, you know, what are we going to do, because we can't just keep growing and growing on this broken model of traveling such a long way. So we're gonna, you know, what can I do? So I decided to just step back, foot off the gas a bit, and actually managed to get in contact with someone who is really keen to build a small scale chicken abattoir on their farm in North Shropshire, which is only 30 miles from here. And they're really well linked for transport and everything. So it will work really well. So now my kind of energy is in how do I support that? How do I support them to get that going? Because then that will really benefit us.
Yeah, it seems like these partnerships need to be made, because if they can't either make pre-sales or get some support from other farmers, these support enterprises have a difficult time getting set up or understanding how much their service is actually desired. Have you, aside from this particular connection, spoken with other growers in your area about, I don't know, perhaps the possibility of collaborating or supporting someone else to get something similar started as far as abattoirs?
Yeah, it's definitely, there's other farmers in the area either doing chicken or wanting to do it, and we do chat. And when I met Hannah, who was saying I want to do it, I was like, well, straight away I know there's X, Y, and Z. So if you were wondering whether it was a good idea or not, you know, I definitely have people. So what we haven't done, and this is maybe just not having the time to do. It would be great if we had like a community owned model, you know, that would be like utopia, and somewhere that was able to do further processing of all the parts. For example, you know, having the license to process chicken feet, being able to make broth from the bones. Yeah, that would be like the ultimate. So that's probably a pipe dream. It's kind of on my radar that if the right thing came in, but to get that going from scratch, it's having the time really to kind of pull it together. But yeah, that's what I'm kind of manifesting. So maybe one day it'll drop in.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Manya, can you tell us about the complexities and the challenges of having so many different products and more or less processing and delivering these all within your own operation?
Yeah, so I guess complexity is a speciality, and it's been a really interesting evolution over the last 6 to 8 years when I've taken over what was a holiday home, really, but it's a property which originally was a very diversified and very complex property, and has a big vocation to be that. So we're lucky in that we are set up to be complex. We have, you know, great and important infrastructure. We're very close to the town of Siena, and we're in the Chianti region, so we have the possibility of getting people over to come and visit us. And so the direct sales is super important for us. We also have got the possibility of accommodating people, so people can stay here. They don't just touch and go. So we can relate to them, so we can touch them, and we can really connect and create relationships. And that's very much what we try and do. We started off with a very small team, and it's been really interesting for me also to live what is evolution in size and complexity, and go through various stages of growth. And as Claire was saying as well, it's really important to know when to grow, but also when to stop before you get into the next phase, which maybe takes you away from that direct relationship, which is what we try to do. So we've been trying to hit a balance between having the size necessary to give us the customer bases that we need, but at the same time maintaining a personal connection with our direct consumers. And in order to do that, the team has expanded. So we are, we call them G9. So, but there's 9 people in the team who are specialists and experts in their sector, but also very transversal in their way of thinking and very tuned into the vision, into the mindset. And a lot of what I do now, whereas initially I was doing a lot of the serving at the tables, checking in, checking out, doing the tours, doing the tastings, as well as being on the land. Now, a lot of what I do is the big vision and doing the transverse, so connecting all these different elements. So the complexity is very much my speciality, and so there's the challenges, and there's also big advantages to it. The challenges are not everybody likes complexity, and I'm asking a lot of my staff. We have a lot of meetings, and we inform each other of everything we do, and everything we do, we make sure we do for 3 different reasons at least. Okay, so with the wine business, we have a very capable winemaker, very capable seller person, but they also need to be able to communicate to the public, to be happy to be seen doing what they're doing, and to explain it to others. And also, we're constantly putting extra demands on them to be ecologically sound, to minimize input, and to make use of their byproducts and reduce their energy and the energy inputs. So, I mean, the obvious benefit is that we produce wine in a region which is well known. It's the Chianti region. Having said that, we're in the Chianti Colli Senesi, which is the less well known of the Chiantis. So that's been one of our challenges in the wine section, is that Chianti Classico, which is just across the river from us, has very much higher fame and prices than we do. And in the export business, that's a huge problem for somebody who puts a lot of energy into making high quality, organic and biodiversity respecting farming. So on the other hand, we're able to communicate to locals. We can actually communicate this added value to locals when they come and visit us. That's super easy, because once they're here, it's fine. It's much more difficult to do that through an intermediary, or maybe even 2 intermediaries, the importer, which then has to communicate it to the distributor somewhere in a different part of the world. So I guess the common link here, or the transversal thread, is the tourism, which we like to call our visitors. Visitors are not tourists, and they're very interactive. And as I say, it's very rare that somebody comes and visits us and doesn't come down and do the animals in the morning and see us move them into the vineyards and do a tour and a tasting and speak to people in the team who will explain what's happening in the farming. And as they drink their wine, and wine is really interesting. Wine has a big audience. Wine is kind of sexy, and it's got a social connection, so it's very accessible in many ways. And wine people are trained to taste, and hence to be sensitive to quality. But with the wine, we can then transmit other elements. We can transmit the oil, which is a bit of a more mysterious and less well-known treasure, but even more interesting, maybe. And same way the other way around, we can talk about the wine side through the people. So we have access to a kind of, having more than one product, we have access to a wide range of audience. And one of the keywords in our mission is inclusivity. So people who come here quite often don't come here for the farming. They don't necessarily come here even for our products, but they'll get it. And in a sense, we're not forcing it down their throat, but I truly believe that some people really want that, even though they don't know they want that. and so we will have access to the whole world here. So they come to us, and in that sense, you have a lot of power in communicating it to different types of cultures, communities. We get a lot back from them. We get a lot of input from them, and of course, then all the export, which is a big drain. We struggle to make ends meet through the export, but that gives us access to those communities when they're back in their own countries.
This is quite a detailed enterprise.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of this is communication, a lot of this is relationship building, that is not just a sales technique, but it's about the community that you're trying to build around all the diversity that you have on your farm. That's what's landing with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's before you start touching at the complexity of the actual equipment you need, or the types of people you need. And and we've got people from all around the world working together with locals. So I'm expecting a lot of from our employers to be open-minded, to be transversal. And actually, I studied in the UK, and I realized when I came to Italy, I was encouraging a mindset which is not typical of the Italian workforce. They're much more hierarchical and maybe more prone to specializing. But of course, the complexity feeds all the way down to the equipment you need. So you will need different equipment for all the different business units. And, introducing the animal element, just push that a little bit even more to the extreme. We talk about animal being important in the regenerative form of farming. And that's often a very big block in farmers. If you're a crop person, you're not necessarily an animal person. And so I guess with a bigger team, you're more likely to get all this knowledge or expertise or just will to use certain skills. And it's actually gives you, as a manager, it gives you much more scope in getting the best out of different people. We've had a very happy find recently when we involved the whole team in our permaculture course, and we related to connection to the soil, to the land, to the animals. And one of our employees, who was from Kosovo and had always refused to work with animals, certainly to milk, because that's considered a very low thing in the social hierarchy, he turned out to be one of the person best connected with the land because he had grown up in this kind of environment during the course. And after the course, he's been thriving, and I've shifted him into the animal management side of things, and he's now taking initiative. He's been with us over 25 years, and he was getting a bit stale, and that gave him an opportunity to reevaluate himself and to the people around him. So, in the diversity, there's also more opportunity of finding the right place for different people, maybe.
That's really interesting because it's just as much a matter of the complexity and the investments in machinery and operations, but also you're saying the investment in people and their skill set and their growth and their interest in this. That's fascinating. I want to go back now to Claire, and then we'll work to Jessica. I want to talk about the culture of processing and micro industry around farms, because in all of the places where you live, this has been the norm for most of agricultural history. And it's a real shame to see this fall out of the way. But do you get a sense not only of how things used to be that could possibly be revived, but perhaps even a hunger from other producers or people in the rural area to try and see these come back? Or is it more of an uphill battle to try and re-communicate the importance of this and what could be lost? Any insights on that one, Claire?
Yeah, I think it is probably a bit of an uphill battle at the moment. I guess we're working in this, two different or three different food systems. We've got the kind of industrialized model, then we've got the kind of direct to customer sort of model that has been, this farm shop and the box scheme and the CSA. But, all of those are fraught with problems, mainly around profitability and challenges. And then I guess it's maybe I see that there's something that's not yet emerged, or, because there's a looking back to how it was. And I don't know, will we go back to that, where there was a butcher in the village and then all the farmers would take their animals there? I don't know. I don't see that emerging again. I'm seeing more kind of newer hub type models, as I mentioned earlier, where maybe it's a purpose-built processing facility, but can also offer added value to all the people using it, and the training, because that's a big challenge we have. The thought of if it was just a case of being able to raise the money to do this, I think we'd probably be able to do with the right people on board. But it's like, even if we got the money to do it, where would we find the people with the right expertise and to run it and all of that? So, and with a high enough turnover or high enough margin that, it's an appealing career for people, because at the moment, a lot of these roles and these jobs are in production agriculture is low margin. So I think there's probably a few kind of society-wide problems that kind of need to fix. It's not through lack of, ultimately, as Margaret Mead says, never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. So I see that it will happen, but right now it feels a lot of barriers. It's a lot of uncertainty politically here at the moment. Our Prime Minister's just resigned. Nobody knows what's going to happen. We know that planning permission might change. It just feels like a bit of a chaotic time. But so I think that it will be something new. I think it will be something new that emerges. I don't know if it will be a replica of an old model. I think something else will come out of it. And I think there has been some interesting ideas that haven't yet come to fruition, but they would be, yeah, more like training sites, experiential for people, for customers who wouldn't just want to be an abattoir in the middle of nowhere where nobody sees it. It would want to be abattoir with butchery, with a restaurant so people can eat the meat. That type of experiential thing, I think, would be the way it will go. But we just haven't kind of quite got there yet.
Yeah, and I mean, this has been going on for a long time, right? These abattoirs haven't just disappeared in the last 10 years. There's been a remarkable decline over what's probably close to a century now as more and more of these places get consolidated. And you don't just lose the facilities, you lose the culture and the technique. I mean, these are very high-skilled jobs, and in the very competitive nature of industrial farming, it's very hard to be properly compensated for that level of skill. And increasingly, it's just machines doing these things. But, as people start to realize that not only do the supply chains that make replacement parts and that keep these things running become increasingly fragile, and there's nobody to replace these skill sets, hopefully we start to invest as a collective culture in reviving these things. Jessica, can you give us an insight into your experience on this, being on the islands? And I mean, these are all they've always been small communities just for the size of the islands that you're on. And out of necessity, they have needed all of their own micro industries to keep some sort of resilience, whereas that has been sort of supplanted by reliance on things being brought out from the mainland. How have you seen this in the communities where you work?
Yeah, so it's a really clear example here where, just 60 years ago, it was mostly subsistence farming. And then in every area, you'd have like each small farm would have a degree of their own processing materials and machinery. And then there would be, like Claire said, the community owned infrastructure. So perhaps in one of the houses, there'd be an olive press, but that will have been invested and built by everybody who then had very clear terms of use for that olive press, and it's community owned, but it's in one of the farms. And then somebody else might have the mill, or there'd be a local mill for everybody, but everything within really short distance. And there'd be there's a carpenter and there's a welder, and like within any community, all of those skills would be there. And I don't think that's unique to the island. What's different is it hasn't been replaced by commodity agriculture here, but more so commodity agriculture, like you said, on the mainland. So it's brought over, so that's not needed anymore. So all of that's disappeared. And I think that, I mean, I really like the idea of community-owned processing machinery, because the cooperative model doesn't, at least it doesn't seem to work here, where cooperatives tend to be really kind of private businesses under the umbrella of being a cooperative. And so the farmer members come last, and the business of the cooperative comes first. And also then there's sometimes issues with like understaffing and lack of capacity to really give a service to all the farmer members. So I think community owned makes the most sense, because then there's security in that, and fairness and access, which is what we need, right? The problem with setting that up is with small scale farming is everyone is so busy. Like, we're all so busy. We don't have time to kind of get together and make it happen. And then, so it's that. And also legally here, there's an issue where that if, for example, I was to have a mill on my farm, then I'm allowed to use it. So there's a legal issue there that needs to be changed. And that's where, and we can probably change it, because we do put a lot of pressure through the Organic Producers Association here on local government and administration to kind of push through legislations that actually work for us.
I've heard that one before, and it just seems so absurd that you either have to be so small that you're only using it for yourself, or you have to be so large and so centralized that you can only service massive industries. And I mean, clearly there must have been some political push at some point to make those, either massive industries or entirely unviable. But like you said, if there is enough political pressure, hopefully that can get reversed.
Yeah, I think there's been a misunderstanding about what industry is and rural. So I think the government in Spain has been trying to protect rural areas from becoming industrialized. And there's this misconception of, there's not an understanding of microprocessing, and it needs to come back because they're just like, oh, well, it comes under the same umbrella as large scale. So that's that they want to try to block any kind of industrial processing in rural areas, and it's exactly what we need, so that needs to change.
Thank you for those insights. I want to go back to Manya now. With all the experience that you have in such complex and diverse enterprises, as well as the processing that goes along with it and the tourism aspect of your business, what advice would you give to someone who is trying to fit all of these pieces together and keep the quality and the process and the relationship all within their own farm?
Okay, I think it's very important. I guess the word I'd like to use is vocation. So I think it's very important to go with the flow and not go against the flow. So first of all, look at where you are and what that place is vocated to do, because then things happen a bit more easily. And the same with the people. I think I talked about the team before. I talked about the people involved in the farm. I think there's a critical size which allows you to be complex without going completely mad and life being taken over by it, because that's the danger of it. And in order for you to do that, it's not just about the size, it's about who the people involved are. So I think it's important that these people are vocated to do that. And so recruitment is a hugely important process, which will make it or break it. And you need to get these people on board. So you have to have a strong vision, which needs to bring everything together. But then I think it's a common theme with Jessica and Claire as well. The idea that you can't be alone in this, even if you've got a decent sized team. I think you have to be part of groups, and especially as small producers, we need to stick together, to support each other, to help each other out. We've all got tips we can learn from each other. There's so much new ground, new knowledge, new things we're doing. And I think the more of us there are, the more open we are with sharing our knowledge, sharing our resources, the better. I think it's really important to have different kinds of people with different backgrounds. And this is what we find in associations. And the other common theme which has come is not just sharing of trying to find a way of sharing equipment, through cooperatives, through communities, whatever. But also the other aspect was we're often working against the law, or we're trying to with constraints. So even if you do have the right equipment, you do have the knowledge, you do have the energy and the intention, then sometimes there's these legal obstacles which stop you doing what you're trying to do for the good. And that's really frustrating. And, bureaucracy is my least favorite word. But on the other hand, I think, like in the case of Jessica, where you're saying that you think you will be able to change the law. I think a lot of these laws are there not necessarily because somebody wants them to be there. They're just there because there was a reason for them to be there at some point, and nobody has the time or has been stimulated enough to change it. And there's a lovely term which the Spanish farmers use when they do things which people call against the law, which can be very simple things like keeping more than one species of animal in the same field, or making compost in a way which is not exactly legal, but they like to emphasize that it's not actually illegal, it's pre-legal. And maybe there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, that you're starting to be able maybe to speak to the authorities now and in such a way that if you can reason why you're doing things and which incentives you're trying to follow, because we are being encouraged to be sustainable, then there is a little bit more of an ear that's happy to listen and to come towards you now, which is hugely important, because it's when you had that wall, which is just demoralizing and depressing. So, I mean, coming from the UK to Italy, I just couldn't believe the amount of laws that you needed to respect and designed for you not to achieve anything. And it took me 6 years to learn that actually nobody expects you here to follow all the laws, but you just need to make sure you follow the right amount, percentage, and that you're aware that you're following them, you're telling somebody you're following them, and then you're forgiven for the other, if you do 80%, you're forgiven for the other 20%, but you do need to be able to talk about it and reason about it. Yeah.
Those are some really interesting insights, and I'm sure that's a little bit different depending on where you go, but anywhere you get set up, you're going to have to navigate these difficult and often very contrary systems. I certainly have butted up against this in Spain, and yeah, I've heard tons of horror stories in our network of people being pinched on things that, like, how in the world is, first of all, that illegal, and second of all, somebody actually enforcing it? But anyway, good on you for finding that balance where you are. Over to Claire now, with the challenges that you are facing, what sort of advice would you give to someone who is trying to get set up with a similar sort of small scale animal enterprise with the challenges that you're facing and the possibilities of perhaps banding together and starting to change things?
So I think advice would be firstly to work out that, often people, I was talking to a farmer earlier and he's saying, oh yeah, we're really good, aren't we? We just get started, like we produce something and then we think about how we're going to get it to market afterwards. And I think that that's definitely something, if you're intending to sell directly to, to your customers, then it's definitely an important part to factor in, because my cost of production is way higher than someone that, lives 2 miles from an abattoir. So I think there is a thing about it, the very boring old thing about doing a proper business plan and understanding what that is, and also building in contingency. So that's as well, like, okay, this one might be open now, but just have a bit of an observation. If that wasn't available, what might you do? And start to have a think about alternatives. And the particularly with poultry, the consideration of on farm, if you can do it. And I think that just because the way that everything's happening now and geopolitical wise, that's going to be the most resilient, is if you can do it yourself. And we have models here where we have, because the regulations, you're right, it's really interesting hearing about that Italian example, because in the UK it's kind of like, on this stuff there isn't really much wriggle room, there isn't that kind of like nuance, but I guess people are starting to be creative. So although you have to, on-farm slaughter rules would be you have to kill your own with the chickens, but then what people have done is develop butchery trailers, so that although you have to then each individually invest in the kill setup, that's actually not that much for chickens. And then this trailer of a butchery unit then means each farm doesn't have to then invest in all of that infrastructure on every farm. So I think that there's those kind of interesting things coming up. So I think that, my advice to someone would be to just make sure that you've got something for now. Like, can you do it? Is it going to be covered? And then I guess it's just a case of, I think one of the other speakers mentioned about being in touch and being in conversation, and people that are growing in this way and are really focused on wanting to produce high quality food from a system that regenerates tend to have a much more collaborative outlook, because they're kind of coming at it from a different way and have either been part of an existing food and farming system and have thought, I want to do it in a different way, or they're totally new to it. And so it brings your mention of culture earlier. It's this new culture that feels like it is emerging of collaboration. And it's not in rejection of an old way or a different way of doing things. It is a kind of like that, definitely that transcend and include, like, what do we take? There's so much steep knowledge in what's happening and what's being done, but we just need to evolve and adapt it now to be kind of like relevant for a new time. So I think, get to know your community, both the people around you, but also in this country, the poultry community. We're quite a small bunch, but there's definitely really proactive WhatsApp groups and other things out there, and everybody is super helpful and generous with their time.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. And from all of these panels that I've done at this point, it is probably the most common bits of advice that come up towards the end of these talks is take the effort to get to know the people in your community, people who already have experience or who have connections in the local council or whoever it is that needs to open doors, because trying to go it alone is never going to make things easier.
Yeah, for sure.
Now to Jessica, same question to you. Given the experience that you've built up over here and the challenges that you've come up with, what would you perhaps do differently, and what advice would you give to someone who is trying to work on some small scale processing, either in their own production or to service the community that they live in?
I'd like to think that I would have done it differently, but I had the business plan there. I did all the numbers. I was like, it's going to work. I can take the grain to Formentera and it still works out with a profit, and I don't have to worry about packaging. I went through, explored setting up a small mill and the legal stuff there. Done 2 applications for mill and grain processing with private financing that fell through the Organic Producers Association, and then with another private. So I don't know, I've kind of like explored all routes. My advice is, yeah, I mean, same, I can mirror what Claire said, which is make sure you've got your processing sorted before you start producing. And also, I'd say make sure you've got your market, which, your route to market sorted and your demand already there before. I don't know. I think it's really hard for me to answer that question because I've been down so many different routes with this. But I think that what I'd like to see here is more direct farmer communication and not through your associations or cooperatives, and for us to sort out our problems together and collaborate and invest together as well. And I think that's what I'd really love to see. And I think at the moment it still feels a bit competitive and everyone's kind of holding their cards a bit, and like, oh, I've got this and what have you got? And, which is crazy because it's such a small island. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the key, because we're all experiencing the same challenges and we're all experiencing the same blocks. And yeah, it's not relying on someone else to sort it out for you, like the local organic association or, a private investor or this or that or the alternative. It's like get together and sort it out ourselves. That's the way forward, I think.
I mean, it's solid and practical advice, and maybe a note on what you're saying about how often people are holding their cards close to their chest, so to speak, and this competitive mentality that lingers. I have heard from farmers from back when that these processing facilities were often the barrier that broke that down. That when you would go and take your goods to, let's say, the mill or to the press or whatever it was, the abattoir, that is the person who helped to make the communication and the connection between all of the other producers of said product, and where the advice and the gossip and all of the communication, because they often live fairly far away, but that was the connection point. And that's where they would learn about what was working that year or what someone else had tried that was, or, what advice not to do the next time. And these microprocessing plants are often so much more than just the service of processing. They are social fabric, and we lose so much more than just access to market or, a shorter drive from not taking it to the large industry further away when these things go out of business. And so wrapping up on, no, please go ahead.
But I was just going to say, I mean, 100% agree with you. And especially, if it's a local mill, then, exchanging grain, all of that shared knowledge happens. And it's really needed, just to confirm what you said.
Thank you. And so let's wrap the main conversation up here, because we've got so much great advice to build on. For those of you who are listening, if you would like to ask some questions, perhaps we could even go into case studies of your own operations, whether you're considering adding microprocessing to your own farm or are facing similar challenges with access to these types of facilities for what it is that you produce. Agnes here in the comments says same for local vets. Yeah, that is also very much the case. being the communication, the social fabric that helps to connect farms that don't often get off of their properties to speak to others. If anybody would like to jump in with a question, now is a good time. Feel free to raise your hand digitally. It's easier for me to see you that way. I'm going through the comments here to see if there's anything else that came up.
Can I ask a question of Manya? Would
Yes,
that
of
be
course,
fine?
please. And between the three of you, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah, just I'm curious about the livestock side. Of course, you know, you've heard what I've been talking about, but just if there was any experience, because I guess the focus of microprocessing here has been on your tree side of things. Any experiences? How is it working for you on the livestock side?
Okay, so it's a bit peculiar because my livestock, I keep I see them as employees, and so they have a job, and I kind of try and justify their presence largely through the fact that they save me a tractor driver and petrol, and at the same time, I have a way of doing my economics, my accounts, which gives a value to reduced input in the future. So everything that they produce in terms of organic material and which then gets used, then I give it a value. They also have a value in terms of tourism. So I also give a tax to the hospitality unit for the service, which the animals do, because we know that people come to us because there are animals. So I think that there's a lot of things which we don't acknowledge. I mean, olive groves as well have loads of other services. They have a landscape service and as well as carbon trapping services. So I try and give values to all that. But having said that, there is something very interesting. I was going to ask you the same question backwards, which is we have a form of company of our activities is called agritourism, and I know agritourism is now expanding in different countries, but it does give you some flexibility, more flexibility, even in terms of regulations. For example, even as a restaurant, if I'm an agri restaurant, I have less stringent rules than if I'm a restaurant, which without the agri bit. And so you are allowed to use your kitchen, for example, as a lab to process food, as long as you don't have to build a lab to, for example, for making jams and things like that. As long as I define a time of day when I'm only doing that, and I show I've got the right equipment and health and safety, meet all the health and safety standards, I can do that. And the same with some meats you can slaughter on site if they're for your own use. So it's a real, I guess that's just one of the things which, if you're not doing it as your main business and in huge quantities, you can probably get away with it. Partly also because it can, it can feed into your restaurant without going past the freezer. You can save energy, but it's the whole thing about having control. The whole benefit about going from the beginning of the process and production to the end is you have much more control over it, and that applies also to the animal side of it. But yeah, so at the moment, I would probably, you probably know him already, but Marco from Pulicaro, who is very focused on the animal side of things. So he gets much more frustrated and irate because he has quite a large scale. He relies on the commercial side, and so he has all the same problems that you have. And it's especially with the grass-fed or outdoor reared animals, the regulations are ridiculous. They still give you the same regulations that you would have in an intensive farm. And so you can get into trouble for doing things like reducing your inputs just because they expect you to use antibiotics or to do things like that. So I think there's once you go on a commercial scale, then we do run into similar problems and frustrations which you're describing. Yeah. And traveling around with animals to get to abattoirs. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should have another session one day just on your accounting processing. I love that model about like the taxing the hospitality with the shit. I love that. So anyway, thank you for that.
I have an external person who comes in just to do that, to be a mediator between me and the hospitality unit and the different departments. But we're getting there, and ER is collecting really interesting data, so you can start modeling into the future. And actually some of the agricultural practices I put in as ammortamenti, call that in English. When you make an investment, you buy something, it has a value per year over the next 10 years.
Amortization.
Amortization.
Yeah. So
Depreciation.
I do that with some of the ecological stuff as well. But you're making assumptions. And so I try to make assumptions based on some of the evidence which is now coming up from studies like the IARA Pioneer Group.
Very cool. Well, look, let me get to a really great question that popped up in the chat here. This is from Stephen Curtis, who I want to extend a thanks to because he is the one who turned me on to Claire Hill's work. It's how I first understood how well she speaks about this issue, and I was keen to have her here. So thank you, Stephen, for that. He writes that he's in the hoop coops right now, collecting eggs, so it's not easy to speak, but he'd be curious to hear more about these hubs that Claire shared about earlier. Any successful examples in the UK or the EU that you have as reference? What could it look like? It's his goal to facilitate this type of thing in his community. How many birds or cows do you reckon to process per year to justify an investment in shared microprocessing capabilities within the community?
That's a great question. So I don't have any like fully worked examples. I would say there are a couple of chicken abattoirs in the UK that I work with that are offering the hub example, and that works well, but there's not enough of them. They're both too far away. But they're a hub as in they are a central place where people can get their birds processed and have the birds and then go back and pick the birds up. I think it would be great if it was going to move to the next level to be able to offer, like we talked about and I mentioned, broth as a good example. So there's that exists as a kind of privately owned business. But as far as like a community owned hub, I don't have any examples yet. I don't have any examples of that, I'm afraid. I think so we need more of those. There obviously are a few people making it work financially. I think that one in particular was able to get up and running. So in the way that the models have worked in the UK, that's the other difference is where they've come from. So they've come from poultry farmers who are having the same problem that we're having. So they start a little bit of on-farm processing, and then someone says, "Oh, can you do ours?" And they get bigger and they get bigger and they get bigger. And then some have had some leader funding out of the old European money at last iteration of that to help with the kind of like rural development funding to help get it going. I don't know if it stacks up financially to do it standalone without that grant funding or not. But there hasn't been one that I would say. So that design is one design, a poultry farmer that grows and then acts as a hub for others. That's great. But I don't know of one. I'd be curious to be part of something that was working on where it was designed, where serving its community first. So it didn't have its own farm and its own interest. And that, because of course that will always take priority and decisions will be made about all sorts of different things, infrastructure, growth, size, staffing, all of that will be based on what that one farm business needs. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity for something here to design one where we're designing it kind of like community first, and to see what that might look like, and bring in the education side as well. So no, I'm afraid I don't know one, but maybe Stephen, you're going to be the first.
Yeah, I certainly wish anybody luck who's trying to get into this. It does seem like there could be a business model, especially with the example that you gave before about possible mobile abattoir and how certain facilities need to be set up on farm for them to get there. I know one of the main ones being access to water, because it requires a lot of water to do proper hygiene in many of those. But being able to bring a trailer around and park it at facilities and sort of create little temporary hubs for people in that area seems to be not only interesting, but that the regulation, I think I've seen them in, is it Portugal or maybe Western Spain, give it a shot. And I haven't kept up on how those are going. So if anyone has reference to these models taking off anywhere where they are, I'd love to hear about it. And similarly, I often mention this to other people who reach out to the Climate Farmers Network talking about how they can get involved in farming. And oftentimes what I say is look at the opportunities that the farmers don't have access to, or these complementary enterprises first, because the barrier to entry to getting some machinery might be a lot less than buying a large tract of land and getting started. And goodness knows there is a demand, especially with the growth of ecological and regenerative farming enterprises, especially in the small to medium scale. that support enterprises of any type are increasingly in demand. And it's not what most people will tell you when they tell you to become an entrepreneur. Right now, it's everything tech and AI, but there is real demand for helping to service these other smaller operations that are losing their access to market and processing facilities.
Can I just
Please, Jessica.
jump in? There's a really nice example of in Catalonia where a lot of the mountain farms were driving really long distances to the abattoirs, and they got together and put a project together and put pressure on local government to have a mobile abattoir, which is now visiting, and it's subsidized because actually it wouldn't make enough money to run autonomously. But the good thing about a lot of farms coming together and demanding things is that the government and local administrations, they normally respond, and also funding is much more accessible when it's when it's 5 or more farms coming together. So yeah, I think there's real opportunities there.
If you have a link to that, I would love to hear more about it, seeing as I'm in the area.
I'll send you the kind of lead.
Please do. Report
The
it.
lead bringer. Yeah.
Oh.
Also, we have an example of a hub in the room, actually. It's not community owned, but it's definitely working on these topics. And that's Alicia Torres from Juntos Farm. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah. Yeah. That's a bit of a, as we say in Spanish, una encerrona.
Sorry, yeah, I chopped you the block there.
Yeah, I work at Juntos Farm, which is that's why I started working there. I'm in charge of like all the grants and all the like project management and bringing funding into the project. And what it's trying to do is to convert an abandoned dairy farm into a community hub. Well, not exactly a community hub because it's privately owned, but trying to offer services and infrastructure and resources to the farming community on the island. That's the aim of the project. But as Jessica was saying, we have all these issues with the agricultural law in the Balearic Islands that is very restrictive. So we can't really, at the moment, offer it to other farmers to come and transform their produce because we have set up transformation, a kitchen facility for transformation, but we can't offer it to other farmers yet because of the law restrictions that we have. So what we're working on at the moment is trying to have the declaration of strategic project in our community so that the government recognizes us as a tractor project that can help the farming community on the island. So then hopefully we will be able to offer the infrastructure services for farmers. So yeah, but for us, it's very important to build network. At the moment, we're working with 41 farmers on the island in the Balearics, because as Jess was saying before, you cannot buy from anybody. You have to be registered in this. It's called Asociación de Preferentes. So yeah, trying to build that community bigger and bigger so we can buy and sell between us and among us. So it's making farming much more profitable and much more interesting for the community. So it's, yeah.
This is really exciting, Alicia. Thanks for jumping in. Can you maybe tell us what the vision, what it is you're ultimately working towards with this project?
Well, the vision is turning this, it's a 20-hectare abandoned farm that was used for cattle and it was used as a nursery for one of the big hotel chains in Ibiza. And the idea is to turn this infrastructure that has about 7,000 square meters of abandoned warehouses into services for farming, for the farming community on the island, but also, as Mania was saying before, is bringing also together the visitors, the tourist sector. So it's bringing together the local farming community to visitors that can come and explore the farm and experience, and at the same time offer these services, infrastructure,
and resources to the farming community. So we're trying to, I would say, like, it's building a bridge between demand and offer, and yeah, that's what we're trying to do. It's a very ambitious project. I'm just working. I'm just my role is grants and projects, and precisely I'm working with Jessica on a project now at the moment called Thrive, which is funded by EIT Food. And what we're trying to do is give visibility to the farmers on the island, see how we can trace the product to consumer, basically. Yeah.
Oh, very exciting. What comes up for me, and because it's been mentioned by a couple others in this panel already, is with like we talked about the importance of people and training and the skill set needed, but we didn't cover that much about the actual infrastructure and equipment itself. And it seems to me that there are actually some opportunities now because the technology has advanced so much in recent years, and probably the accessibility of machinery that could handle sort of small to mid-scale size processing might even be more accessible than it used to be, or easier to justify the investment for. I know, Jessica, you were talking about a seed cleaner yourself, and there were a few other things about like a small abattoir. Obviously, you have to do calculations about the volume that it would need to process to do that. Does anybody want to give insights into how they make those calculations, and if there are good opportunities now with smaller scale machinery for processing?
I'm happy to respond to that. So even in the last few years, it's changed dramatically, where there's much more independent manufacturers doing much smaller scale, farm scale machinery. And that's really exciting, because what was, like a 20 plus investment, or didn't, maybe 10 years ago didn't exist, then everything's really large scale, and then or medium scale. Now you've got a really good offering of small scale machinery for like for really small farms like me. I was just looking online just before, and there's a seed cleaner that I can chuck on a remolque, so
On a trailer, yeah.
trailer, and it's it's $3,000. I mean, I've got to do some research to see how good it is, but there's anywhere from $3,000 to secondhand for $6,000 to there's really good options at very low prices, which just didn't exist before, I don't think. And yeah, and of course there's grants as well. I'm a bit of a grant person, like always applying for grants. So yeah, and also small scale mills, there's much more offerings now, and I think that's the direction it's going, which is great.
Yeah, I'm really glad that, we've talked about so many difficulties in this right now, and there's a lot of pessimism in this space, but at least this is one positive thing that technology is bringing, despite it having killed so many of the smaller processing units before. Maybe this is an opportunity for people to set up these micro industries with a reasonable investment. Does anybody else have examples of opportunities in the machinery space? Manya?
Yeah, just one thing. In the olive oil industry, we traditionally rely a lot on mills, external mills, to do your milling. And they have got a little bit of that hub feeling of that's where everybody meets and you exchange ideas and opinions and see how everything's going. But on the other hand, in the olive oil industry, there's a lot of elements, including access to the workers who will do your pruning, your harvesting, and then on top of that, also the mill, which really affect your ability to do a good job, because it's so sensitive. When you pick, really affects the quality of your oil, and how you gauge and manage your mill. It also really affects how you can get the most out of the olives you have. And the mills nowadays are super high tech. They're amazing. They make all the difference in terms of quality. I'm super low tech, and we will sometimes press our wine with our feet and use old mills. And I think you can get great wine like that. But when it comes to oil, that's one of the reasons that oils nowadays are so much better than they were once upon a time, because it's so crucial that the oil doesn't come into contact with water, with air, and it gets well at the right temperature, at the right pressure, and everything else. And that has been for many years completely inaccessible because these mills are so huge and so expensive and demand so much energy. And now there are a number of different mills coming out which are smaller and fairly accessible, and would give you as a producer much more control over that part of the process in terms of timing and everything else, and maybe could become one of those aspects in which one could collaborate with a few people nearby, and maybe share the costs and share the work required behind it, which is another aspect for that 1 month a year. You're there all day, all night, pretty much. But yeah, that's a good story as well behind technology, which it's nice to point out every now and then some positives. Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you for that insight there. And do you know of either producers or brands where these smaller scale processing machines are coming out from?
I can't. I'm not really into the.
No worries. I'm just trying to anticipate the inevitable question from
Yeah,
listeners
I
of
know.
this when we post it.
I
They're going to
can.
want to see where they can find this
I've
from.
got a little group. I just type in that question and I'll get billions. If you're
Nice.
interested, I will do that in a moment and then send it to you in the
Well,
chat.
this is the kind of great stuff to share in the community
Yeah.
with climate farmers. This is exactly where people are discussing these things. And I'm wondering if anyone has either heard of or have any experience with open source machinery. This is one of the things that I got into a couple of years ago. There was a TED talk on it of open sourcing the design for accessible and repairable, usually small or micro scale machinery for farms, because there's not that many things made for this scale, right? People make the money off of large machines, and there is a real demand for people to kind of go beyond what you can do with hand tools, but before you need a massive tractor, right? And there are some open source websites that I've seen. How much they've progressed since the years since I was checking it out, I have not seen. But the really attractive aspect to me in this, other than having the designs freely available, is being able to repair it yourself, because a lot of them are designed around materials and equipment that you can get from a local hardware store, or not having to wait, weeks, like in Jessica's case, for a replacement part for a machine that could make the difference between a viable harvest or not. Has anyone any experience with those? Nope, unfortunately not. If Steven is available, I know he's out there in his hoop house, but you kind of have a perfect example of collaborating with a small scale machinist and engineer to create the design for some of these egg houses that you're currently using. I think this is also a really interesting possibility for working with, engineers or people who want to specifically service these smaller enterprises that need specific machinery that fits, in your case, the regulations that say you have to keep birds inside for bird flu, which at this point is almost every year this comes up, but you still want to be able to move them around pasture. So these types of things, I think, are a natural outcropping for the changing goalposts every year for what farmers are expected to accommodate. We've got Agnes here in the comments saying that she knows a lady in Nepal a bit far away, but they built and maintained their own processing machinery. Yeah, things like this, like there is sort of a cutting edge on this. And then there is, of course, the difference in regulations, the access to funding that holds a lot of it back. So what I'm hoping to explore, if anybody has any either examples or ideas here, is where do you see things pushing forward and getting around the constantly moving target of keeping up with regulation? It seems we've already identified so many of the challenges of getting something started that is viable enough to service, let's say, a small community. Claire saying that you don't have examples, but you think this is a part of a new way of doing things. Yeah, I would hope so too. I mean, to me, the entrepreneurial spirit that gets people into small to medium scale farms when, this is such a challenging thing to start in this day and age is also the same attitude that would approach microprocessing and, services to these farms with the same attitude. And I certainly know people especially since it's attracting a lot of young people into this who have skill sets either in industry or in marketing that can be a real asset. I'm seeing some people nodding their heads here. I'm not sure if you've seen examples, you've talked to people about this. This is where I see a lot of excitement.
Yeah, on that point, I'm wholly convinced that again they're talking about workforce and experience, but that the future workforce in food production will come from that kind of part-time. But there's actually a guy in the UK called Ben Raskin who's written a book called The Part-Time Farmer, based on this model of, for simplicity, checking the cows in the morning and then designing websites in the afternoon, using and everybody's better. It means we're getting more different, diverse knowledge, experience, etc., coming into our industry, but also it's giving people that currently have sedentary, middle of horrible offices in cities jobs and are really unhappy, access to work. I don't need to talk here about the benefits of all of that, and I really see that being a really but part of the future. And maybe I'm waiting for that to be a bit more established before we kick off something bigger. Yeah, exactly. There, as Agnes is saying, people can't get a job and they realize it's a healthy and sustainable way forward. But I think that's a really exciting part of the mix.
Yeah, very well said there. And I mean, especially the tech and the startup sectors are always talking about disrupting industries. I think big agriculture and the processing or middlemen units are probably some of the ones that could most use a disruption at this point, especially as the fragility and the difficulties of the global supply system, the types of fragility of needing to wait weeks for a part when you're waiting to harvest something, that's just not viable. And that's not just for small or medium scale farmers. That's not viable for large scale farmers either. And I would really love to see people who are, good at tech, machinists, engineers and such, move more into this space, because I do believe that it might be one of the barriers for, let's say, younger farmers or people who want to add complementary enterprises to existing farms and get into this in a way that doesn't require such a massive investment in land, to partner with these people, much like Stephen and they are doing up in Finland, to figure out novel ways to service a growing need for high quality, unpoisoned food that can actually make it to your doorstep. I mean, this is only going to continue to grow as awareness around all of the difficulties, the health costs, the environmental costs of the industrial way of farming continue to rise. And I just see so much opportunity here for the right people who are willing to take a risk in creating new opportunities and want the lifestyle benefit of moving to rural areas and partnering with people who make the highest quality food available. So I think this is maybe a good place to start to wrap it up. Manya, you were going to jump in there?
Yeah, just somebody made a comment about Gen AI, and so I just wanted to. A lot of us talked about direct sales, contact direct with the farm, contact with the consumer, and at the end, the consumer is the citizen. And I think I agree there is a wider society need, and maybe we need to be a bit more creative where we look for workers. There's a big lack of workers. And maybe we're looking at the traditional way of getting into farming, but since we as farmers need all these different skill sets, maybe maybe some people who come from different ways of life are also looking for something to believe in, something which is worthwhile, and somewhere to make use of their skill sets, maybe creatively. They're looking for a lifestyle change. Then maybe those two things could meet. We were looking, we're about to lose a tractor driver, somebody who's been here for 40 years. And, we were thinking actually a lot of what a tractor does is a mechanic. So maybe we look at somebody young who's in mechanics and wants to apply that and combine that with a lifestyle. But we work a lot with volunteers and students and young people. And I often find that the AI gen gets to a point where they get to a crisis, and it's usually at 28 years of age in my experience. So a lot of the people who come here and usually look for working with animals or with the vegetable garden, so basically they want to be in a quiet space in nature, are quite often coming out of a very difficult time of life. They're rethinking, where am I going? What am I doing? I'm looking for something meaningful. I don't want to speak to people too much for a while, and I can deal with animals. but they're very receptive, and I think both that access to people through the workforce and also through as a consumer is a really good way for us to re-promote rural life and farming in its new format, which is happening, and these people are the consumers, and it's a very good bottom-up way of delivering a message which ultimately needs to change the system, the economic system, the social system, and the political and funding system. And they are the people who drive demand after all. So, there's loads of benefits of thinking a bit laterally.
Brilliant, Manya. That's such a valuable addition there. And I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. There is so much that we can continue to explore on this and so many case studies that I would love to hear from others about as well. But this is exactly what we've got the Climate Farmers community for. So if anybody would like to join this conversation and you are an active farmer anywhere in Europe, you can join for free through our website at climatefarmers.org. And of course, the recordings for these are on our YouTube channel at Climate Farmers, as well as the Regenerative Skills podcast. So I want to say a sincere thank you for those of you who, well, not only gave incredible insights and shared your experiences and really advocated for this in your own way, but also for those who participated in the conversation and added your questions as well. We really love the support, and we look forward to seeing you on the next call as well. Thank you, and have a great rest of your evening. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.